close, almost there. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning in to BAMF Podcast. I'm here with Wes Zebrowski. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. How about you?
All right. We're doing an IGDN spotlight. But before we jump into that, let me play my contractually obligated intro music. Just 1 second. And that very professional musical intro is to assure you, gentle viewers, gentle listeners, that this is a high-quality podcast, only the finest farm-to-table, ethically sourced, gluten-free, geeky conversation for your podcast listening pleasure. And today, we're talking with Wes about Runecaster, which is his new RPG. It'll be on Kickstarter launching soon. You can check it out. The pre-launch page is at tinyurl.com/runecasterrpg. And those of you on iTunes can't see it, but we've got some cool art that we are sharing. And Wes, can you give us kind of the elevator pitch for Runecaster?
Yeah, so Runecaster is a game in which you play as kind of a young fledgling mage who's still figuring out how to make magic. And so it's all about you as a player combining all these different types of runes to make these really unpredictable spells that can do some really powerful things, but can also blow up in your face. So it's this game of kind of creative magic while also emphasizing the learning process.
Okay, so it sounds like it's really more an RPG of discovery and learning as opposed to hex crawling and killing monsters in 10x10 stone corridors.
Absolutely. It's a very narrative-based game, so not a lot of crunching, almost no dice rolling. There is some dice rolling if you'd like. Really focused on telling a story between you and the GM and your other players and getting each other invested in what you're doing.
Cool. What size group are you envisioning for this?
Yeah, I think this works best when you've got one GM and about 2 to 5 players. Once you get more than that, it kind of is too much waiting time for everybody to take their own turns. So caps out about there.
All right, cool. How has the playtesting been going?
Honestly, it's been really, really good. Like, I was blown away and surprised at how smoothly it ran every time. And I think the most fun part is that because it's kind of this subjective dialogue between the players and the GM, people have interpreted things really, really differently. And so they'll be like, oh, I want to cast some explosive magic, and they'll try something. And it'll be completely different from what someone tries the next day. And so that's kind of a puzzle and fun engagement for me as the GM to figure out.
Okay, that's interesting to me. So what's the framing element here? Are the PCs at a Magic Academy or some other kind of setting?
Yeah, so the way the rules are written, it's pretty flexible. You can use them in pretty much any setting where there is magic, and the thing you as players want to do is make magical spells. Like, that's the way you solve problems. However, the kind of one-shot and the campaigns that I've been running with it have all been kind of based in a magic school, just because that's what's been interesting me personally. So it kind of sets you up for that, but really the world's your oyster in terms of how you want to run it.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the one-shot that people are doing in the playtest?
Yeah, so the one-shot, which I'm including in the book, essentially puts all the players out on an exam to get into magical college, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so they're set up with this whole kind of encounter. It's giving them discrete challenges that are kind of pushing them as players to start to engage with the magic system in kind of a ramped way. So their very first challenge they get is they come up to a cliff, and they're just told very simply, oh, you've got to climb this cliff, which is very straightforward. But it allows people to start in a lower stakes, figuring out how different types of runes might combine to do different things. And then once you get to the top, they're presented with a more nuanced challenge of trying to figure out why all these skeletons are rising from a graveyard. And there's a lot of kind of branching solutions depending on what kind of magic they want to cast.
Okay. How are they solving the skeletons problem? What have you seen different groups do?
Yeah, so some of them have been pretty smart, and they've kind of like picked up on the clues and figured out that the grave tender was in fact the killer of these skeletons. And in order to put the skeletons to rest, they had to kind of deal with the grave tender. But they've done this in different ways. And some were like, well, if we just get rid of the skeletons, there'll be no problem. They can't rise up from their graves. And so they smashed all the skeletons together and then made kind of the big bone Goliath thing that had to fight. And so there's a lot of unintended consequences happening. And in the end, not to spoil it, but the players end up realizing that, like, oh, this is all some kind of explicit exam. So this is set up by the school. They're not solving a different thing. And so I think the funniest part of that was at various times people tried to like psychically communicate with the grave tender to figure out what they were about. And they ended up seeing the student who was kind of putting on the show for them. And so people were very confused, like, oh, who is this lizard? This person isn't a lizard. And so it was fun seeing different people kind of approach that from different angles.
That's interesting. Now, I'm looking at the Kickstarter page, and I'm going to share that in a second. But before I do, some of the text you have here is, forget rigid spell systems. Instead, casting spells is a dialogue between the players and the GM. Magic is like cracking a code. How do you combine runes to make a spell that you see in your head? How do you do that in gameplay?
Yeah, so the way the magic system works is there's 9 different runes, and each of those runes have both kind of literal descriptions, but also very kind of flexible metaphorical descriptions. And then you, as a mage, have 3 different sizes. There's large, medium, and small, and you could put up to 1 rune in each slot. So if you want to make some big fireball, you could put the heat rune 3 times, but that might be way too big. You might set the entire room and yourselves on fire. And so it kind of becomes this dialogue of figuring out, okay, what does heat plus cold do? What does animate plus mending do? What kind of spells can I make? And then the player kind of forms their theory of, okay, this is what I think the spell is going to do, and I'm going to use my conduit. So I'm going to use my wand or my book, and here's how I'm going to cast the spell. And the GM will think about all of that and then kind of iterate on it and say, okay, here's what actually happens. And that's kind of the feedback the player gets of like, okay, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And then they take a bunch of notes, as a good student would, to try to figure out what went good and what to improve on next time.
Interesting. Sharing your Kickstarter page now. I think we've got your 9 runes right here.
Yes.
So that is kind of cool. This is probably way off track. Did you ever read any Grant Morrison?
That name's super familiar.
Okay, no worries. He comic book writer. He's still pretty active out there, but
yeah,
he used to write about glyph magic in some of his books. So kind of reminded me of that. So we got an image here of someone actually looks like they're well. I don't know what what are we seeing here?
Yeah, so this is just an image of me painting the rune for force. It's kind of an in progress painting. So during the game, you're not going to paint your runes because that takes a lot of time, but we do kind of have nifty little printable rune guides. And what we did for playtest is we laminated them, and then people had markers. So then they actually kind of sat there and drew out the runes as they were thinking about their turn, which kind of provided this really fun, almost tactile replacement for like checking your phone during a game, which none of us should do, but all of us probably do a little bit. And so the drawing actually becomes a part of the game, which I found to be really enjoyable.
That's really, you are the second designer I've talked to who had drawing as a component in an RPG. That's an interesting idea. I'm just shocked I've met a second guy who did that. I knew a guy he did a superhero game called It's a Plane, where literally the resolution mechanic for the superhero interactions was drawing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's very different from what you're doing. It's just similarities. So, what were some of your inspirations for Runecaster?
Yeah, so I think there are some very straightforward inspirations, but I like the ones that are less so. So I think back to like a 1DS game I had when I was just a little kid called Lost Magic, which is totally forgettable DS game, reviewed very poorly. But you used like the DS's little stylus pad and you drew little runes to make different kinds of magic. And that stuck with me. And eventually I was like, okay, I really want to make a role-playing game that's like that makes me feel like how I should have felt when I was playing a wizard in D&D, where you think you can be so creative, but then you're kind of stuck to this rigid system. So I really wanted a more creative system. I think the other kind of fun inspiration that really guided me was the book, The Name of the Wind, by Patrick Rothfuss. Did you read that one?
I have not, no.
Okay, well, it's a popular book. You should check it out. Okay. But in it, the main character makes this little artificey contraption where called an arrow catch, where it's basically the cylinder of potential energy. And when an arrow approaches a caravan, it kind of tricks a little lever and it stops the arrow. And I thought, oh, that was so cool, the way these unique kind of creative ways of using these little magical sigils to do this kind of physics, almost science-y based stuff. And so there's not really explicit artifice-y in the game, but that is kind of a big part of it, right? It's not just using magic. It's about using like your scientific mind to try to figure out what you think magic should do as well.
Okay. That is really interesting. So you mentioned you have a campaign that you're running. I'm guessing your home game, or maybe some longer playtests you've been doing. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the story the players are finding themselves in that situation?
Yeah, so it's been a bit since we've returned to it. It's been like on the back burner. I would love to go back, but it was actually set in Magic the Gathering Strixhaven world, because unfortunately, a little hooked on the magic at times, and I love the worlds they make. And so basically, it's kind of a furry magic school, which very much guides the art direction of the book. And I just love the idea of like these little owls running around and casting spells. And so I had sent them on kind of this almost remedial class, right? All my players were these mages who kind of flunked out of their traditional college houses. And so they kind of put it all together. And they were learning all these different spells that different students would not typically learn within their houses. So it's kind of really emphasizing this creative learning process. And a really fun moment that happened close to when we left off was they had all kind of gone into the sewers, and they'd found this big elemental made essentially of like muck and garbage. And their task was to clean it out, which was kind of a task that was way above their pay grade as little remedial students. And the elemental started emitting kind of this toxic gas because the players had figured out it was really weak to fire. It would burn up. But the muck elemental said, I'm going to release a bunch of explosive gas, so I'm going to prevent you from using my weakness. And then the players didn't care, and they shot fire anyways, and they like blew up the entire sewer system and transformed like one of the main squares of the college. And so it was really fun role-playing that fallout, being like, okay, you just woke up in the hospital, and unfortunately you've got some lasting damage. And where do you go from here knowing that half the campus has you as a pariah? And so it was kind of a fun example of how explosively bad things can get when you're not thinking about how you're putting your roots together.
That's fun stuff. Like, as soon as you recover, the dean is out there and would like to speak with you. And that is pretty cool. So we are in a pre-launch page on Kickstarter right now. People can go check out. When are you launching?
We are launching on Monday, which is exciting and also terrifying. It's very soon.
I feel you. That is January 6th. That's coming up very quickly.
Yep. And then it's going to run the whole length of January, and then Zine Quest will hit, and we'll be all done. So we'll dodge that.
Okay. You want to avoid Zine Quest? Yeah.
So I've heard some mixed things. Sometimes it's a big boon. Sometimes you kind of get lost in the shuffle. For me personally, it worked out better to do it this way because I am a university professor by kind of the day. And so I wanted to get things kind of launched and taken care of before the semester started. So if I had to launch it mid-semester, I would be a little more drowning in work. So this kind of worked out better for me personally.
Understood. So can I ask where you teach?
Yeah, I teach at Loyola Chicago.
Oh, okay. Midwesterner. Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm from Indiana originally. I live in Denver now, but was at Purdue for a while, and I had a lot of friends from Chicago there. So. Oh,
nice. I finished my program up in Bloomington, Indiana, and I have a friend who teaches at Purdue, so I'm still connected to the state.
Nice. Yeah, I transferred from Purdue to IU Bloomington, so I was kind of a trader. Yeah. Yeah. If I had to pick between the two, I enjoyed Bloomington a lot better. But yeah, that's cool. So what do you teach?
I teach environmental policy and kind of land use policy.
Yeah, I actually graduated with the degree in SPE, Public Affairs, Environmental Administration.
Okay.
So I think I understand a little bit. I mean, I haven't worked in the field, unfortunately, but I fell into computers about 20 years ago, and I've been doing that ever since. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, this is a really cool project. One more time, folks, tinyurl.com/Runecaster RPG. It's go ahead, hit it now. Get yourself reminded when they launch. And launch is in like less than 48 hours, not to freak you out, Wes. So check it out. This looks like a fun game. Support our buddy Wes. And any closing thoughts, sir?
No, just thanks for having me. It was great to talk to everyone. Please check it out. So excited to get this done and then launch the next project inevitably in like 6 months or another year. So, but very excited to get this in everyone's hands.
Cool. All right, folks, check it out. And we'll catch you next time on the Banff Podcast.
Thanks, Mike.